so fortunate that the church is sent.
Good. Good. I'm glad she's on the mend. I have a question. Hey, Eric. Good morning.
Hi, Sue.
So, what does this mean? Psalm 51. Against you only have I sinned and done evil in your sight.
That is our primary relationship is with God. Our primary purpose is to align our hearts with our souls. So the primary sin is when we turn away from that purpose and away from God.
So any sin is against God first.
Yeah.
If you sin against your neighbor, you're sinning against God too.
Does this also mean that you can appear to us, everyone else, as being without sin, but yet to God, God knows that you have sinned, or you have sinned against God, but you appear just kind of like the Pharisees. You know, they followed all the laws, blah, blah, blah.
And they still sin against God. How could you do that? I mean, like, what would a sin against God be that wasn't known by your neighbor?
That you're not actually following God's will, following God's ways.
Yeah.
That you've got this in. No, you don't have the intention.
Yeah. So God can see your heart, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's one of the issues that in the baptismal covenant. We talk about Sunday. Because Sunday is what? What color do you wear?
Pentecost
White
Sunday.
jeans? This is a preamble.
I already have it ready.
You have it ready? Good. John, do you have your red outfit ready? Yeah, busy afternoon, John. Sewing up something, whipping up something. Sally?
Oh, I just had a question about this phrase that says, against you only have I sinned. So does that mean that you really aren't sinning against people when you do something wrong? You're just sinning against God?
What do you think?
I think what else is right, it's the same thing.
Right.
Okay, so it's one thing, even though it seems like.
So that it's problematic, right? Or it's not problematic. The clarity comes because if you feel justified in your sin against somebody else, right, based on what they've done or what you perceive to be a slight or a grievance, that event's immaterial to the fact that it is against God. That's what I would suggest. So where are we? We're in chapter 13.
Joyce,
Yes, Sue.
I wanted to say something about your question.
Okay.
It could mean that each one of us is imbued with divinity. And when we hurt our neighbor, we hurt God too.
Yeah, I would think that's exactly right. I think you're right in saying that. Right. That's the nature of a soul. So because the soul comes from God and is in each person, then when we hurt somebody, we completely violate our relationship with God.
Yes.
Yeah.
Why did you ask us that question?
Just struck me as I was just thinking about it. It just came up as I was. What'd you say?
Distracted.
Yeah, no, I just thought this is interesting because there's so much in here, right? And we read it all the time. And that's the thing about these texts, that even though we read this like last Friday and then the Friday before, and there's stuff that comes up, I think, in our scripture, which is why reading it and thinking about it over and over again is fun. So that's what I'd say. Now we're in Hebrews chapter 13, which is right before 14, except
There is no
14. So we have to drag this sucker out for a couple of months, I think, which is all things are possible with God. So, don't, let's read this. Let mutual love continue.
Where are you?
I'm in chapter 13, the book of Hebrews, Sue.
Yeah.
Somebody,
I know that. What verse?
oh, number 1.
Oh, well, my translation is different. That's why I got. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Well, Sally, could you read from your translation? Let's just read maybe verses 1 and 2. Let's,
Yeah, I can manage
let's
that.
sprint, let's sprint out of the gates,
Okay,
Ally.
okay.
They're up.
Let brotherly love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares.
So what do we got there? Anybody else have a different reading? First sentence, Benta?
Never cease to love your fellow Christians.
Holy cow! What translation is that?
Whoa.
The Revised English.
Yep. What do you got, Al Einstein?
New NRSV.
Uh-huh.
Let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it.
So what's she referring to there, biblical scholars?
Oh, Abraham and that when the 3 men came.
Completely, Genesis 18, right? So the thing that we have to remember as we're sort of gliding into land in the book of Hebrews, that one of the foundational things that we get from the book of Hebrews in a really beautiful and significant way is the hermeneutic of the incorporation of the Old Testament. So what she is doing all the way through this book, which is why we continue to sort of reference back to the Old Testament, is she is saying, look, this stuff was there, this stuff was good, this stuff led us towards thinking about how we are now settled in the world because of Jesus. All right, so that's her thing. And so this is yet a remembrance that this is what we do, and this is why we do it. So she wants the mutual affection to continue, mutual love to continue. Do not neglect hospitality. Well, what else does this do? What else is this hospitality of strangers recognizing in the Christian theology? Hey, Kitty. What's it recognizing?
Divinity into every being.
Completely, right. So that's the other thing, because remember, she's pushing back against the desire for the community to retrench in their Judaism. And to retrench in their Judaism is to retrench in what? The tribe, right? The people, the chosen people, the exclusive nature of their community. And she said, you can't do that, because all of these other people they're God's children, right? They're strangers to be loved. They could be angels. And we have to continue to break out of this mentality of a closed system. So,
Sort of like the fundamentalists of today.
right, did you have a particular, well, yeah, I mean, I think they were pretty fundamentalist back then. Today it's even more on,
I think he's kidding.
no,
I'm not kidding.
no. But today it's around assent of an idea.
Yeah.
Whereas back then it was even more tribal.
Yeah.
Like literally,
But basically, not all, but a lot of fundamentalism is about themselves, and they're the only ones doing the right thing. Everybody else is wrong. Even other Christians.
For sure. Or, I mean, even more complicated, they were chosen by God before the beginning of time to be right, and everybody else is wrong. Such an odd little twist.
I think I grew up knowing this verse as be ye kind to strangers, for in this way some have entertained angels.
Who has the King James Version? Where's Inez? Anybody have the King James Version in front of them? Might say that.
Yeah, I think it probably does. And it's just such a beautiful, concise bit of poetry and prayer.
Yeah, it comes together that way, doesn't it? I don't know if we have a.
Do you think we have a Bible?
Do we have a Bible? I don't know if we have a King James.
Ooh, a good addition.
Don't encourage her this early.
Sorry. But
Jeez.
she's finding the groove.
This must be the
That's
King.
that's the truth.
That's the rector's
Angels may fly out of that.
That's just.
Don't put it on the music stand.
Good Lord, they broke the church.
Is it Bible study or much? There's a new bishop.
You know, the
Competing
world-
interest,
You
competing
know,
interest.
the world isn't doing a very good job with this though, because we're very tribal all around the world.
Very tribal.
We don't like
And we're-
strangers or the other.
And we all, and in many, you know, regions of the world, including our own, where we think that our way is the only way, or we're trying to beat the other people next door to death or something.
Yeah.
It's pretty scary.
Why do
Witness
we-
Florida.
Why do we keep doing that?
I don't know. It's our animal side. or
It's human
something.
nature.
Listen,
Do you want the King James version?
do you have it?
Yeah.
Well, let's hear it.
So, okay, let brotherly love continue. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares.
Okay.
That's Diane, if you don't recognize the voice. Thank you, Diane.
You're welcome.
Don't get sunburned out there. She's on a boat, yes.
Doesn't sound like
Favorite.
There she, see, there she is.
Oh,
Now
Diane.
that's,
Are you in
Uh,
that's
Winslow?
a saying, yeah.
Yeah, ahoy, skipper.
I have the wheel here, but I'm not allowed to touch it. So
Yeah, just don't be Gilligan, right?
So let's read on. Let's verse 3. What? It's giving us some advice here. 3 through 5, and then she punctuates it with 6. What do we got? Verse 3. Someone read it. Lisa, you got it.
Yeah, sure. Remember those who are in prison as though you were in prison with them. Those who are being tortured as though yourselves were being tortured.
Keep going. Keep going. We're through 5.
Let marriage be held in honor by all, and let the marriage bed be kept undefiled, for God will judge fornicators and adulterers. Keep your lives free from the love of money, and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you.
Okay, so what is she giving us right here? It is capstone lessons.
The commandments.
She is giving us the commandments, isn't she, in a way, right? But in these commandments, why these commandments? Why are these the ones she's focusing on for the community?
It's probably what she sees the community guilty of at that particular time. You know,
Possibly,
Oh,
possibly. What's another twist on that
what's
same
happening?
thing?
that she may be seeing, I don't know, was she in Rome?
Yeah, she was in
So
Rome.
she's seeing people in prison.
In torture.
Christians, yeah.
This is the time of Nero,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So they're capturing the Christians and burning them in the garden for garden use.
Yep.
But she's talking about it, not just how it happens to
That's
other, to others,
Terrible.
but
Sorry.
how we need to imagine, what is it, like a height of compassion that is happening to us.
Right. That deep,
Well,
that
we're
deep,
with- that we're
It's
Truly,
connection
truly with the other person, or in the place of the other person.
that empathy, right?
and being accountable to one another. Right?
So these other things, the marriage bed and money,
Yeah.
these are two things that are just community destroyers, right? These things are the things that just rip communities apart. They're the two things that always get priests fired. Hard to fire a priest, but this will do it, right? These are always the two things: adultery or stealing money. Eric?
Oh, no, just apart from the community, I mean, these two things are probably near the top of the list of things that are good for your own mental health. And, you know, to be content with what you have and to be faithful. All right.
Just makes life so much easier on so many levels.
Well, it also speaks to, I mean, people who fall into these traps, right, are looking for something they feel they don't have. They're
The
looking-
striving.
Right?
Yeah.
And then it follows on, I will never leave you or forsake you.
That's
So
the-
you don't have to do this.
That's the punchline there, isn't it? Right? Because we already have what we need.
Exactly.
We already have the thing. And so, right, that's the punchline. And where does that come from? Straight from the book of Deuteronomy. Right? That is right out of there. Again, well, it's quoted, isn't it? Deuteronomy 3. But you have these other things, right? You have the Ten Commandments, or two critical functions in the Ten Commandments. You have how we are together as a community that's being torn apart. We can't be torn apart because we're intimately connected here. Even as people are being burned to light the dinner parties. That's sort of gross.
Sorry.
Thanks, Lisa, for your contribution.
I don't get to come back.
She give it, then she take it away.
I know, it's a terrible thing.
All jokes in the beginning.
And then why is this all okay? Right, the Lord is there to help us. Right, a constant present. The Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can anyone do to me? Besides the candle thing in the courtyard. But even that. Sorry, Lisa keeps bringing that up.
I'll try to stop. I'll work on that.
Right? Why should we not be afraid?
Because we're not alone. I mean, we're connected to God. We're safe.
That gives us confidence, right? So this is great. These are the things she's reminding us of in her conclusion. What can anyone do to me? Nothing.
Is that so?
Is that true?
No, that's not what I was going to ask. But
It sort of seems like somebody could do something to me.
wait, you're making me forget my question.
Oh, sorry.
I want to actually ask Al this question.
Okay.
Because this is the kind of puzzle that he's good at. So are you hearing any kind of corollary to what Deutsch started us off on, which is against you only have I sinned? That notion that your only sin is really against God, and the notion that I have God and I really don't need anyone else in a weird way. I mean,
Right.
Right?
Oh,
I mean, are you-
Again, your belief in God or your relationship with God supersedes everything that's earthly. And so whether you're in prison, being tortured, or committing adultery or whatever, that's earthly. People attack you as earthly, but all that is sort of subsidiary to the relationship with God. And once you have that relationship, you can endure anything.
So when Dwight asked us last time, who is the most important person in your life? Or what's the most important? Yeah, who's the most important person in your life?
Should be God.
God's
As a person. Depends how you use the word person.
Oh, so
Well,
you
it's got a
asked-
person.
But it was a person, it was us, because we're responsible for that
Oh, right.
relationship.
For that relationship.
Okay.
So,
Some cliff notes would be good.
fair enough. But who can do anything to me? Now, these are also important words because of the persecution that's going on, the thing that's driving them back to their Jewish community, right? Nothing can happen to you because God is with you. Now, a lot of people lived this, and it was the thing that made Christianity so powerful and to grow so fast. It is the complete paradox. The more Christians they killed, the more Christians there were. So this was true. John?
Oh, excuse me. Did they see it at that time, do you think? That the persecutions grew the community?
I think I don't know the answer to that question, but if there was any hint in the minds of the martyrs that they were doing it to grow the community, it would have erased their martyrdom. Right. So the thing that gave those activities such strength was the complete and utter belief that they were going to do nothing that would set anything between them and God. And so to go to death for that was a small thing. That was powerful. If there was any coercion to it or any complicity to grow the church, it would have collapsed.
Well, no, yeah, I wasn't.
Yeah.
I
Yeah, but like,
wasn't-
did the community see it? I don't know.
Well, I think that the subtext to that God is always with you, so therefore you don't need to fear. I think that also says every single person matters.
Right.
And if that is not a revolutionary idea back in the era of who knows what, that every person matters.
Completely. Right.
That's
And that was because they believed really just the opposite. who mattered the most back then?
Oh, the people with the money.
Well, the people,
emperor.
not necessarily, yeah, yes, but the money wasn't the thing that made them matter. They, well, no, they were given those things because they mattered by God, right? And so if you mattered to God, then the secondary impact was you had power and you had money and you had prestige and you had things, right? So those are just a simple symbol that God loved you more. And then
They believed that, or that was true? When you said
well, I don't believe it was true. So
they
but
believed that God gave them the money?
well, yeah. So if God loved you, then you have a bunch of kids, and you have a long life, and you have a lot of resources, and that's just God. Yeah, it's because God loves you, right? So it's easy for people in the community to say, well, God hates me because nothing's gone wrong, right?
It's the prosperity gospel.
It's completely the prosperity gospel, right? That's a old time Joel Osteen. That's what they. So then they go on to say, and this is good news. Verse 7. Somebody want to read it?
I'll read it.
Okay.
Remember your leaders who preach the word of God to you, and as you reflect on the outcome of their lives, imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same today as he was yesterday, and as he will be forever.
So let's stop at verse 7. How catastrophic has that been for the church? Right? All of the priests and pastors and who, I mean, you see it over and over again. Mark Driscoll and 50,000 Catholic priests, and I mean, like it is catastrophic. One of the things that you hear most from people who denigrate Christianity is a comment on this line, right here, right?
But it ends, imitate their faith. So I read that as that they were picking out the good leaders.
He's talking about the next.
No, I suppose
Oh,
that's, no, I think that's right. I mean, remember your leaders who spoke the word of God. You consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Well, that could be true.
I assume that a lot of them
were martyred.
Yeah, martyred.
I imagine a ton of them were martyred. That's true. And imitate their faith. Well, so that's a positive spin on it.
That's how I read it, but
Yeah.
I also see your point that
Right.
when so many people are not worthy to be imitated,
Yeah.
right? I mean, they were not living up to this verse. Drives people away. I mean, who wants to be part of a faith if the leaders can't do it?
And it's I just heard did you guys hear that NPR story about that mega church in Massachusetts? That it was maybe last Saturday or I don't know when. But this guy who came out, a young guy, very cool Christian kind of guy, and built this huge church, and then stole all sorts of money and did all sorts of things, and it was just such a shame. And as I was listening to the sort of excerpts that they had of his preaching, it was fabulous, right? I mean, like the things he was talking about in the church he built in my NPR clipped, was really good, right? And you thought, oh, he did such good, and that could stand on its own. And he did this other thing as well, right? And both those things, but this is the thing that was why I was under here, right? This collapse.
You know, it's interesting. It was to me that for a number of years I studied Buddhism intensively, and my teacher, my lama, unbeknownst to me, but apparently it was a big scandal, about 10 years ago, got involved with a couple of his students, adults, but consensual, but still weird. And, it blew up his marriage, it blew up his center, it blew up the whole Sangha, people took sides.
Hence this first part, right?
Yeah. And I just happened, I hadn't actually sort of checked in on, what those folks were doing. And just this last week, I started Googling and I'm reading this stuff on, holy shit, like, what? And I saw him talking about it. And he said that it wasn't until, he was in his mid 60s that he learned compassion. And the only reason he learned it was that his entire life blew up, that he'd hurt everyone who was closest to him, that he was publicly humiliated, that he had to face the fact that he'd never faced his own. I mean, his faith, at least in the context of Tibetan Buddhist practice, was intact. He was an amazing teacher.
Right.
I mean, he could, you know, he was one of those people in whose presence that you could like go into meditation immediately.
Yeah.
And yet he so violated that trust, and he didn't even, like, for years he defended his activities, right? And persisted. And he talked about how the ego, and, you know, he talked about spiritual materialism, and he talked about the ego. You can think that you're holy because you can do all the trappings.
Yeah.
But if your heart isn't true, you're gonna be just like the schmo next door and do the bad stuff.
And did he help a lot of people?
He helped. I mean, he saved my bacon.
Yeah.
You know, for better words. But I mean, I learned to meditate.
Yeah.
You know, it was huge. I learned to detach
Yeah.
in interesting kinds of ways that were important at the time. But it was just interesting to see him at the end of his life come around to this. I'm not saying this to excuse him in any way. I don't even know, you know, and now I'm sort of looking askance and thinking I would never go back there.
Yeah.
But it was just interesting to me that you can really fool yourself into thinking you're on the path when you're not on the path.
Right. Sure. Or be on it, but sort of not, right? I mean,
Well, and then it gets back to against you only have I sinned. Right?
yeah. So Jesus, the same yesterday, today, and forever?
That's the most important verse there.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah. I mean, especially in the context of today.
What do you mean in the context of today?
Well, because so many people just totally discount Jesus.
Oh.
But he hasn't changed. It's the world's perspective of him that's changed.
Right.
Or at least the world I'm familiar with.
The perspective, but I'm not sure their knowledge of them is any better today.
Today it's worse.
Yeah.
Much worse. But people are too busy to take the time to figure it out. That's what I've concluded.
Yeah. They certainly don't want to.
Yeah. It's easier. It's much
So
easier.
they're about to die.
Yeah. Sometimes then.
Yeah. But then I'm puzzled about this because we have this law in Texas where they want to put the 10 Commandments in every classroom, every school. Well, in theory, there's nothing wrong with that. But then when you consider the ulterior motives behind the people wanting to do that, it's totally wrong and against God's will, I believe.
What are the ulterior motives?
Oh, I think they're just trying to force their perspective of life, their rules, not God's rules necessarily, their rules of life on the situation. Yes. I don't believe that they're doing it with hearts filled of God's love. They're just trying to force what they think is right on other people.
Well, and maybe this first verse back in 13, let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers.
Yeah.
We'd argue that's probably not doing that.
So this is a complicated thing. We talked about this last night, didn't we? At the one, not the one Balthazar, the City of God Augustine class, about, and Rosemary was bringing up an incident where some family members were trying to get into a room where someone was dying actively to save them, right? To have them accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior before they die. And that, presumably, was a sincere effort. Because if they die without being saved, straight to hell forever and ever and ever. Right? So if you believe that, like if that is a core to your theology, you're gonna like break down the door to get in there to save somebody from going to hell forever, because that's horrible, right? That's a tension. You similarly, you put up these 10 commandments, right? To help the community be better. And then we won't have gun violence, and then we won't do no murder, and then the kids will finally get it. It's a little dumb, but it's complicated to come up against that belief. What do you think?
You could tell.
Oh, clearly, yeah.
Poker face. I was just thinking, what would happen if, I mean, I think they'd hate it, if people are proponents of this, but what if you also put up, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path?
Exactly.
And whatever the equivalent is in Islam. And Confucius, the author of the Rule, the first author of the Golden Rule. And you have these things on a wall of, great spiritual paths in history, or, the spiritual practices common to all religions. I mean, that would make for some really interesting study and conversation.
Let's read on.
The only problem with that, the way I see it,
What?
is that you can have that up there, but if kids don't see the people that matter to them doing those things, it's all malarkey.
Well, let's read on.
Okay.
Do not be carried away by
I
all.
like that.
Do not be carried away by all kinds of strange teachings, Barbara. For it,
The wisdom all crumbles.
for it is good for the heart to be strengthened by grace, not by regulations about food, what's served in the cafeteria, which have not benefited those who observe them. Right, so that's that's exactly to your point. I mean, what we need here on that wall is grace.
But that's the people around you. If the
Exactly.
people around you are expressing grace, then you see these principles enacted rather than posted.
And that grace comes from God. Right? She talks about it here later. We'll get to
Oh,
it.
that's really beautiful.
Right?
Yeah.
So she is coming down hard on that, the regulations about food. Who's she referring to there? Peter, right? Breaking that in the book of Acts, chapter 10, which have not benefited those who observe them. Jesus talks about that, like what goes into your stomach comes out in the sewer. But what's in your heart is what matters. So she's hitting that point very hard too. It's how you, back to the first sentence, right? Let mutual love continue, right? And how does it continue? Not by the rules you put on the wall, but by the grace that comes from your heart. And that is what matters.
And then again, back to against you only have
By
I
sin.
sinned.
Yeah.
Mine says, keep on loving each other as brothers.
Yeah.
That's so simple.
Sort
Hard
of.
to do.
Yeah. Depending on your brother.
What were you saying about Pentecost this coming Sunday? We'll be renewing the baptismal covenant to respect the dignity of every human being. It's right in there.
Good Lord.
Oh my God.
We've got to, yes.
So we have an altar from which those who officiate in the tent have no right to eat. Why? She's hammering. No, but there's a reason why she's doing that. Why is she doing that? Let's read on. For the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the sanctuary by the high priest as a sacrifice for sin are burned outside the camp. Therefore, Jesus also suffered outside the city gates in order to sanctify the people by his own blood. Let us then go to him outside the camp and bear the abuse he endured. For here we have no lasting city, but are looking only for the city to come. So remember, one of her big points here is who is Jesus, right? So you have a big point in the letter of Hebrews is the hermeneutic, right? The Old Testament being lived out or being fulfilled by Jesus. And the second thing is who is Jesus? Well, who is Jesus? Who are we meeting in the book of Hebrews? He's better than angels, right? He's superior to angels, but he's also a human being, but he's the human being that goes into heaven for us, right? He's the head guy at the beginning, at the front edge of the universe. He's also a priest. Which priest? Who is what? The high priest, right? Without any affiliation to the Levites, or what's that other group of priests with the Levites? No, that's the same one. It's the other one.
Aaron.
No, not Aaron. Aaron and Levites. Yeah.
That is the Cohen's.
The Cohens. But what is that other? What's the other line that was in the big fight during the time of Isaiah? Oh, good grief. Probably in my book. You remember those guys? Not the Levites. No, they were Jews. Good Lord Almighty.
One of the tribes?
Yeah. Oh, right. I just remembered the Guild of Gershon.
Yeah, right.
But
He always brings up the
the Gershon Guild, that is the new name for the altar guild. For those of you that have forgotten. Uh-huh. That is exactly right.
I know, that was so many chapters ago.
Trying to. Okay, I can't remember the Levites and the that other. I know. That's because I was hoping somebody would remember. Now I can't remember. That whole other group was in the big fight that became the Essenes. Somebody. Yeah. Zadokites. Yeah.
Tip of my tongue.
What do you mean I never heard of him? You have him right here in Bible study. Right? Rosemary was the only one. She was raising her hand behind me the whole time. I just didn't see her. Saying, Zadokites, call on me.
She was on mute.
She was on mute. Thanks. You did not bail me out, Rosemary.
Right.
So anyway, back to the priests and not the Zadokites.
Are we striking the Gershons?
We are. They just clean up.
The Gershons, they set the table.
They do the laundry.
They do the laundry. The Guild of Gershon does the laundry.
I feel like I lost the thread about 20 minutes.
So let us then go outside the camp, verse 13, and bear the abuse he endured. So what she's doing is she's taking it outside of the temple. She's taking it outside of the tribe. She's taking it outside of the control of the priests. She's stopping it and expanding it. Jesus, who was and is yet to come, right? He was always there and present. And she's pushing it outside of the tradition to the stranger, to the community, which is where Jesus went to do the sacrifice. He did not do it in the temple, right? He did not do it as a priest. He did it outside the walls for the world. And that's where he endured the abuse. Because there's no lasting city in there. There's only the city that's yet to come. Revelations. John?
Well, a picky point is that the priests have no right to come to Christ's altar, to come to our table. It just seems the notion of right is really not in it. Does anybody have a right, or does anybody not have a right? Seems more proper to say they do not come.
Or you could say they don't have it by right, right?
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is what I would say is the distinction.
It all hangs on preposition.
Because we go outside, all of us
Right.
go outside, right? Because of what Jesus has done. Through him then, verse 15, let us continually offer a sacrifice of praise. Psalm 51. We say it every Friday. That is the fruits of our lip that confess his name. Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God.
As opposed to the blood sacrifices in the temple.
Yeah, so how do we sacrifice to God?
Doing good thing.
And?
Sharing.
Right, it's right. So through him we offer praise to God, right? Through the fruit of our lips, and we do good things for the people. What does that remind you of? Luke chapter 10.
The 2 commandments.
Well,
Every commandment.
right. Some say that comes from Deuteronomy. Right, but that's the two things. That is it. Praise God and love our neighbor and take care of our neighbor. Right, and that's what I've been preaching on when we've been talking about the metaphysics of what it means to be a person. Right, the heart is the choice to take care of your neighbor and to take care of the world, and your soul is the thing that attaches to this thing that's in every single person. Right, the perpetual love of God that comes towards us, and the way you respond. See, there's only one way to respond as a soul to God, because you have to remember the soul is a receptacle of the generative love of God. Right, it is not an initiator. There is nothing that is initiated from the individual soul. It is only the receptacle, it's the vessel. Right, and so how do you respond to that? The giving of God's self through love to us. What is the only way to respond? Take it and like whoop some ass with it?
Doing good to your fellow man.
No, but Thanksgiving. Right? Gratitude is the only response. Right? So the heart, of course, is that, right? That's the action of doing these things in the world, right? That's the royal piece of the royal priesthood that somebody's been talking about every Sunday ad nauseum. But the soul, there's only one response, which is gratitude. And worship is an activity of gratitude. It is not the activity of getting God to do something. It is the activity of saying, thank you for this thing that is coming at us. Which is why I always say there's no agency with the soul. There can't be, because it's coming at us from God. And who does it come?
Gratitude manifests then by loving your neighbor.
Yeah, well, well, I would say the loving the neighbor is the alignment, right? So it's the alignment. It gets us in the groove. And so we got this thing coming at us. Everybody's got this thing coming at us. Everybody's got this thing coming at us equally, right? And the response is gratitude. I think without gratitude for that, it is very hard to create alignment. So I think people that don't believe in the soul and don't go to church or don't worship, I think it's impossible, I'll say this, for them to align their heart. Why? Because there's no countervailing force against which to align it. There is, like we know there is, but within their activities, there isn't. Right? So if you don't believe in the soul, if you do not believe in God, if you do not believe there's this active force of love that is driving into your life that create equity of all being, then all activity does remain hierarchical and capacity based.
It's
right?
all within the bounds of the camp.
Completely. And the more you do, and the better you are at it, the better you are in the mind of your own making. And that, yes, Sue.
Just when you were reading, it came to me one of my favorite verses is, "He leads me beside the still waters." And that's kind of the mantra for my life. I feel led and directed, and it's how God reaches out to the lives that I touch. And I've always feel pushed to be better and to do better. And I think that's God pushing, leading.
I think that's probably true. I think that's why so many people are so deeply drawn to the 23rd Psalm. Because God is leading, soliciting, pulling, right? And the soul doesn't rest until it rests in God. I mean, it has to be in that thing to rest. And so one of the complications of a culture that doesn't believe in this piece is you still have a culture that is built on striving, that is built on materialism and accomplishment, right? Because there's no countervailing force of gratitude to a God that's coming at you, and not only you, but everybody equally. That's a hard thing to get our minds around, that everyone's equal for only one reason, because God's coming at him, right? So that's Elon Musk, and that's the guy with no brain that's sitting in that institution. Completely equal, because there's no agency of the soul, right? And so this guy with no brain who's laying here in the hospital bed doesn't have to align heart to soul because they're already soul, right? They're already full in. It's us with the capacity for heart decision to create that line. And that's the purpose of being alive. And that's the purpose of church. Or I would argue, a lot of all religions seek to create that alignment in their own way. You know, I think Christianity is way better, of course, because I'm in it, right? But that is why, that is their organizing reality, is to create that alignment. And so if you deny that there is something against which to align, you have a completely off-center culture. And Sally, to your opening point, do you want to know why we have a completely off-centered culture? It is this reason. I think it is this reason. So.
Well, it's the perversion of, who's the most important person in your life, right?
Exactly.
So we're advised to love ourselves, right? Without
loving God.
Without loving God.
I'd be looking out for number one.
And that's when you're like, whoa, you've missed.
Yeah.
You missed the moonshot.
And there's all sorts of little things people know. Well, I'm a good person and I do charity and I give away money and they completely wrap up in there. So the first thing I always wonder about a person who lives that way and doesn't believe in God is why they are so completely delusional. Meaning to say, if you don't believe, why are you doing this? It doesn't add up. Right? They do it all the time, right? Because there's actually something that's tugging them. But really, it should be way more narcissistic than that. I don't need to give away anything. So there's a tug there.
Well, they want to be well thought of. I mean, the ego wants to be praised.
Yeah.
Right.
But they can, you can buy praise.
Yeah.
Or you can employ praise all the time. It's easier and cheaper. Maybe easier, not cheaper. But so I think this is important as to why, which is why this place and places like this place matter so much.
So you would argue that altruism is, whether known or not, always a response to your soul's gratitude.
Yeah, I think when participated in and felt, it is.
Yeah.
Well, no, I don't know if I would say that. I would say it is a response to a tug in your heart.
Toward gratitude.
Possibly.
It's the magnetic force of your heart to your soul.
Yeah, it's like there's. I would say that, but altruism and charity is not the same as adoration and thanksgiving.
True.
So it's not quite that, right? So it is a desire for alignment, but it's like running in a circle or something, right? It's not the same as gratitude.
No, it's not. But you wonder if it is the magnetic pull of the gratitude, the heart towards
the thing that's.
It's like there's dark matter out there.
Yeah, exactly.
But I actually think that there is something about that, right? That there is this force that is, trying to pull these heart and soul together.
Well, completely, because we are all receptacles of the unrelenting, mighty love of God. Like that is the thing that creates full equality, which is why we get the famous line from Saint Lazarus. Thank you, Rosemary. Saint Lazarus. When
I had my hand up.
Because you were going to say Saint Lazarus, I understand. In the famous line of Saint Lazarus, when he's living in Cyprus and he sees and this is before Mary came back and gave him the manifolds. What's the story?
Broken vessel by broken vessel.
Yeah, broken vessel breaking a vessel. He thought that was super funny. When the kid running along with the empty clay jar drops it and breaks it, right? Because that's what we are. We are vessels, receptacles. Rosemary.
you know, all this kind of reminds me, there's recently was the National Geographic had a 7-part series on the life of Miep Geese, and how, you know, covering her and her husband, keeping the Frank family and the other folks up in the annex, and bringing them food, and, you know, and doing all this at great peril to themselves. And, you know, the Diary of Anne Frank is now verboten in some places in Florida. And I'm thinking, so I reread it, and she says, in the last Hanukkah celebration that you see, you know, that they have, where she makes little presents for everybody out of things that she has saved over a period of time, you know, for Hanukkah celebration of, you know, of the saving. And then almost the last thing she writes in her book is, I still believe, and I'm not quoting it correctly, I still believe, despite everything, that there is good in people.
Right. Well, whether there's good in people is hard to know, but there's absolutely God in people.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's the deeper insight. So, you know, so you don't even have to say everybody's good, but you do have to say everybody has God. And that then forms our activities, which is why we have to welcome the stranger. Because the one thing we know for sure about the stranger is what? They have God. Sue? Sue?
This is a question about something you mentioned earlier on in the Bible study, but I have to ask you, we're talking about hell, and my question is, what kind of a God would make hell?
Really, a very creative God who is interested in pyrotechnics.
Oh, God.
Or not. I think hell is the world that doesn't believe in a soul. And that's not God's issue. That's humanity's issue. Because God makes it pretty clear that everyone has one. So I think you need to get away from that imagery of the fiery hell, Sue, and just let it go, because it's not the point of Christianity in any way. And we certainly don't claim that to be the point at Epiphany. You know, God doesn't believe that.
Where's hell in the New Testament?
Well, it's in Matthew 25. Yeah, if you go to Matthew 25, near the end, you get a whole sort of, we talked about this last night, didn't we, John? You get a whole treatise on hell and eternal fires if you don't treat God well. But it's a very, and also Mark 13, right? But the thing about that particularly, I'll just say this real quick. You have to start reading Matthew 25 in Matthew 23. And that is the beginning of the conversation that Jesus is having with the Pharisees and the Sadducees about his role. And by the time he gets to chapter 25, he's really, and you have to remember the context, he's speaking to the Jewish community, and the Jewish community knows what book better than any book? They know the Bible. And so when he gets to 25 now, he's drawing a very hard connection between Daniel chapter 7 and this idea of Jesus as the Messiah. And he's taking ownership of his leadership as the Messiah. And because he's the Messiah, the Son of Man, to use the terms here and to use the term in Daniel, because he owns that position, he has the right to divide the sheep from the goats. But then when you look at the words the sheep and the goats in translation, the word sheep refers to four-legged animals, which animals are the four-legged animals? All of them. And the goats, so that's everybody. Who's over here on the right hand of God? The four-legged animals. Who's that? All of them. And the group on the left are the goats. Well, if you take translation, that's kid goats, right? So it's a very specific group. And what Jesus is doing in this is he's saying, you kid goats, who are the kid goats? The Pharisees and the Sadducees. You're in trouble because of how you're treating people. Then you go on and you finish chapter 25 and you go to chapter 26 and you find that's when the high priest says, we're going to kill this guy, right? Because that is the straw that broke the camel's back, the accusation that they were the ones, that he had the power of judgment over, because he is like one who's coming in the clouds, the Son of Man, which is the allusion to Daniel. And so when you start looking at things like the fires of hell that we find in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25 at the end, and you take it out of context, you get a super confused theology that calls people like Sue to say things like, God, why did God burn people in hell? Sue, he doesn't burn people in hell. That's a terrible interpretation of what the scripture says. But a lot of people do it. And it creates a lot of problems for Christianity. And then people go and say, why would God do this? And the shortest answer is God doesn't do this. And the Bible doesn't claim that. So it's a complicated thing, right? Scripture is a complicated and nuanced thing that gets so taken out of context that we get all sorts of people saying, what kind of God would burn people in hell? And the answer is no God that we have any understanding of burns people. So that was a very long answer. Sorry, Sally.
No, fine.
So you with me on that?
We certainly do agree.
Right? Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
Yes.
A little bit? Yeah, okay. Is that helpful, Sue?
We should explore it.
Yeah, we'll get them.
I don't know. But I have some questions about the song to the Lamb that we read at the first part.
Good. Let's get to that next week. Because
yeah, some of the theology in that is awful.
we're running. But let's just say a prayer now. Holy God, holy and mighty, holy immortal one, we are just grateful to you for the blessing of our conversation, for the beauty of this day, and for the opportunity to worship you. And what that means is an act of gratitude to you for what you've done for us, and that we may live that out in